Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. On the channel, I've been researching turbocharger upgrades for my 2021 A90 Supra with the Gen2 B58. This upgrade is going to be required for me to reach my goal of building a 600 wheel horsepower streetcar. Additionally, subscribers have asked questions about various turbo options and what I would recommend, so I did a deep dive on turbos that I would consider for my build. In my previous videos, I've looked at the new Pure 800 and Pure 900 turbos, as well as the new gen turbos from Dynamic AutoWorks, which include the UltraFlow X, the 6466, and the 6769. But today I want to look at a turbo that's come up multiple times in comments of those other videos, and that is the Remnant Performance 65 Omega Turbo. Before going over technical specifications of the 65 Omega Turbo, it's important to know what we're trying to replace. The OEM turbocharger is a twin scroll design and is capable of supporting anywhere between 500 and 550 wheel horsepower. Of course, these are top end numbers. This would require running race gas or methanol injection or a higher ethanol content to achieve these numbers. The 65 Omega Turbo is sold as a kit and is specifically designed for the A90 Mark V Supra. In designing the 65 Omega Turbo, Remnant Performance stated that they started with a stock-style turbine housing, exhaust manifold, maintaining the twin scroll design with properly sized runners, and an enlarged turbine housing for maximizing flow and minimizing lag. They also stated that the properly sized turbine wheel combined with the large 65.4 millimeter billet compressor wheel provides a solution for quick spool and flow to keep torque levels up even out to high RPMs, resulting in the capability of high horsepower utilizing this turbo. Just like new turbos from Pure Turbos and Dynamic AutoWorks, the 65 Omega is a new turbo, so there's no core charge or no core exchange. Remnant Performance has a supersonic compressor housing that is standard on all the 65 Omega turbos for increased spool-up sound. So this is really their version of the T51R mod. Something different about the 65 Omega compared to any of the Pure Turbos and Dynamic AutoWorks turbos is this is a actual dual ceramic ball bearing turbo. Pure and Dynamic AutoWorks turbos are journal bearing turbos, and so is the OEM turbo. A similarity between the 65 Omega and Pure and Dynamic AutoWorks turbos is it's a stock location turbo. This means it uses commercially available downpipes that bolt up to a stock turbo. So if you've already upgraded your downpipe to a catless downpipe or a high flow catted downpipe like I did on my car, it will work with the new 65 Omega. The turbo also reuses the electronic wastegate actuator from the OEM turbocharger. This allows the ECU and DME to control boost just like it did from the factory. To address what's considered to be one of the negatives of this turbo, the wastegate actuator arm is retrofitting the factory electronic wastegate actuator to this turbo. I don't necessarily think that this is a problem. You see complaints, people are like, it wasn't working properly or it wasn't adjusted properly, and the answer to their problem is right there. It wasn't adjusted properly. Remnant Performance has gone to a large length to make sure that it's clear on how to install the electronic wastegate actuator on their turbo to make the electronic boost control work. Many larger turbos, including top mount turbos, often use standard pneumatically controlled wastegates to do boost control. And while this is great, there's nothing wrong with that. The reason Remnant went to all the trouble to develop a adapter to make the electronic wastegate work on their turbo is because your ECU has the ability to control it, and you don't want to lose that and require additional hardware. For instance, my car has a motive reflex on it to control flex fuel, but eventually it will control port injection. But also if I decide to go to a larger full frame turbo and go to single wastegates, or if I have twin scroll dual wastegates, that capability is there. But the thing is, if you're just getting into an upgraded turbo, you don't want to go to all the trouble to get that additional controller So Remnant Performance maintaining the electronic factory wastegate actuator is really a good thing. And if you follow the instructions on the install, their adapter arm will work. And there's numerous cases of working fine, but you'll see people complain and say that it's a problem or it's a negative or they didn't design it well. It's not that at all. It's more of a user error when it comes to the install. Once you install it properly, there's no reason that you're ever going to have any problems with it. So moving on, each 65 Omega turbo is actually a kit. It's a kit for the A90 Supra. And in this kit comes a new upgraded charge pipe, intake piping, a new airbox, turbine housing, heat shield, and then all of the fittings and hardware to install that turbo on your car. Their charge pipe is a two-piece design, like mini aftermarket charge pipes. And it comes with 1/8-inch NPT ports, so you can do meth injection if you wanted to. But also it's adjustable, as in the coupler that connects the upper half of the pipe and the lower half of the pipe is able to move to make up that adjustment for if you install a port injection plate, it's going to space, or if you put a new intake manifold like I did, it did move the location a little bit of where the pipe goes. So you get some adjustability with the Remnant Performance charge pipe. Additionally, with this adjustability of their charge pipe, it also allows you to reuse your existing aftermarket upper charge pipe. So I have a Forge Motorsport charge pipe, two-piece, but I would need to change the lower section to mount up to the 65 Omega Turbo. But if I wanted to, I could keep the upper part that I already have if I like it more than the piece for Remnant Performance. Granted, I'm pretty sure they're very similar. Their included air intake is also a two-piece 4-inch intake that has provisions for integrated PCV and CCV connections. And they say that it maximizes flow in the upper RPM range and that smaller intakes have a negative choking effect on high horsepower applications. I tend to believe that this choking effect they're talking about is true. This is also why Pure with the Pure 900 went away from using a stock style air intake. The 65 Omega is also being made in 2-port and 6-port versions to cover all the years of the A90 Supra. Remnant Performance claims that this turbo has the ability to support up to 950 wheel horsepower. Something additionally highlighted by Remnant Performance was the number of blades on the compressor and turbine side. They state the 65 Omega has a 9-blade compressor side and a 9-blade turbine side. This wasn't a specification that was really highlighted or even mentioned by Pure Turbos or Dynamic AutoWorks Turbos, but I was able to gather that information so we can have a comparison. To understand blade count and the effect on turbochargers, I kind of have a 10,000 foot view, a generalization of the effect of more blades or less blades. So let me read what I got here. Less blades on a compressor or turbine, there's less surface area to interact with air, allowing a faster airflow and higher boost at high RPM. So that turbo with less blades would be skewed to be more of a high or top end power turbo. More blades grab more air, leading to quicker acceleration and better torque at lower RPMs. So more blades would be a turbocharger that's more low end power oriented. So to compare turbo sizing, I'm going to mention the inducer and exducer, but I'm also going to put on the screen what the blade count is on the various turbos. So I've included the sizes of the OEM turbo, the new Pure 800, the UltraFlow X, the new Pure 900, the 6466, and the 6769. So to compare the 65 Omega to those turbos, the 65 Omega has a compressor wheel size that is a 65.4 millimeter inducer and it's 9-blade. And then the turbine wheel size is a 58 millimeter exducer and it's also a 9-blade. So looking at all those numbers, the compressor size is slightly larger than the new Pure 900 and the new Gen 6769, but the turbine wheel size is the smallest of all of these upgraded turbos. It's larger than the OEM, but none of the other ones have as small an exducer on the turbine as the 65 Omega. Now, going back to what Remnant Performance said about a properly sized turbine wheel, this might be where it's coming in. I'm not going to pretend that I'm some sort of turbo expert. I know, as a general term, smaller usually means spools up quicker, but maybe runs out of the ability to move volume at high RPM. And then larger has that high end volume capability, but takes a while to spool. So we're going to get to the numbers on this turbo, and you're going to see some pretty impressive numbers about the Remnant Performance 65 Omega, but I'm not educated enough to say the 58 millimeter exducer is too small or it's the right size, and then the 65.4 millimeter inducer on the compressor side is the right size, or that 9 blades is perfect, because as you can see there with the new Pure 800, which we're going to see some impressive numbers from that turbo as well, it has a 7 blade compressor wheel and a 9 blade turbine wheel. So what does it all mean? That's why I pulled the numbers, so we can actually look at the hard data and then try to determine and possibly come to a conclusion on what's the best turbo for your build and what's best for my build. So that was all the readily available information on the 65 Omega, but just like in the previous videos, I kind of want to give you real world data, real world power data on what these turbos can support, so that you can determine what's the right turbocharger for you. I did some more data mining to get this information. I pulled from reputable sources, mainly shops that posted power numbers and modification listings for their shop car or customer cars. I placed all dyno data and supporting mods that I could find for people using the 65 Omega Turbo, and I placed it into my existing spreadsheet. I then sorted it by horsepower. I included torque numbers if I had them, but again, torque numbers can be somewhat manipulated. The A90 Mark V Supra, the transmission has a known practical torque limit of about 600 foot-pounds of torque. So in many cases, tuners limit torque to try to protect the stock transmission, or to limit it even on a built transmission. So you'll see numbers and it might be lower, but the horsepower is higher. I kind of feel as though torque doesn't mean all that much unless you're making too much torque for the stock transmission you have. I was able to find 10 dyno examples using the 65 Omega Turbo, and then I was also able to find some additional data on the Pure 800 and Pure 900, and then I was able to find one additional for the Dynamic AutoWorks 6769 that actually came from a subscriber, Supra_Maverick. All of the new data for the Pure turbos and for the Dynamic AutoWorks turbo are going to be in bold on the chart. These examples all followed a very similar pattern. These turbos are used with pump gas, 93 octane pump gas, also used with slight amount of additional fueling, whether or not it's meth injection or low level ethanol content increase. But additionally, these examples had additional fueling, upgraded low pressure fuel pumps using port injection. I did not find any using direct injection for the 65 Omega, but again, increased fueling. When you look at the data here, the pump gas 93 numbers were average to below average in comparison to all the other turbos I reviewed. The horsepower range on 93 octane was 478 to 523 horsepower. The numbers don't lie, but I feel as though something else is involved. Maybe more conservative timing, maybe poor dyno conditions, but the 93 octane numbers that I was able to find were not that impressive. With increased fueling and upgraded low pressure fuel pumps, you can see, granted with the addition of port injection, the highest number that was achieved was 892 horsepower, which is very impressive. So ultimately, looking at the Remnant Performance 65 Omega, it performs very well as a large turbo, especially when given additional fueling. But yeah, those 93 octane numbers are not the best. So now I want to put that data from the 65 Omega with data we have on the other turbos that we've already looked at. And I went ahead and grouped them by horsepower group, just to make it more digestible. The the list is actually getting pretty large and it's hard to look at in its totality. So breaking it down by horsepower just makes it easier to kind of see where those turbos are performing in their peer group. So looking at the chart, the high end in the 500s is going to be 591 horsepower, and that's from a pure 800. And then the low end, you see that's kind of where the 65 Omega turbos are stacking. Again, I'm really not sure why that is. You see the additional data there in bold. Another pure 800 making 556 horsepower, and then a pure 900 making 584 horsepower. And this is all where you probably would expect to see performance with 93 octane pump gas. And then there at the top of the 500, you see some additional fueling with some E30. But yeah, I was a little surprised by the numbers that came out for the 65 Omega on this particular chart. And then moving on to the 600 horsepower part of the chart, we see there the two instances of the 65 Omega. And then we see from our subscriber that 6769, where he made 628 horsepower and 644 foot-pounds of torque, which is really good. But we also see an additional pure 800 run there, which is 93 plus meth. I think what I gleaned from this is I'm a little surprised at the lack of performance in this particular range here with the 65 Omega. Like, for instance, the E71 run made 623 horsepower, but if you look just below it a little bit, you see two different runs running E30 and E28, not requiring a low pressure fuel pump upgrade, not requiring port injection, and made more power. So I don't know how representative this is. I'm assuming with more data points, I would see higher data or better numbers. Because I mean, there are pure 800 runs that are not as good as the 65 Omega, but it doesn't appear to be shining very much in this window of 600 horsepower. Moving on to the 700 horsepower chart, there is a 65 Omega making 781 horsepower, which is very impressive. On E71, running port injection. A lot of good upgrades there, port injection and low pressure fuel pump. We also see some additional pure 800 and pure 900 power numbers in there. But this is more of what I would expect from a 65 Omega from what I was getting from technical specs. Moving on to the 800 horsepower chart, this was just pure 900s before, two examples. There's two more examples, granted it's the same car with two different tunes on it. But there is the 65 Omega, two runs right at the top. E68 and E70 making 886 horsepower and 892 horsepower. And that second one having over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. This is the performance that I expected from the 65 Omega. I'm not exactly sure why a turbo that's able to make this kind of power struggles for whatever reason with 93 octane pump gas. It's got to be conservative tuning, bad conditions for a dyno, because I kind of feel like this is more indicative of the performance you could expect from a 65 Omega, and the other ones not so much. Granted, some of those other data points were promoted by Remnant Performance, so they thought they were good enough to post. This kind of performance well into the 800s is what I was expecting to see, and there it is. Now that we've looked at all that data, I want to go back to the performance claim that Remnant Performance had for the 65 Omega. They stated the turbo was able to support up to 950 wheel horsepower. Similar to with the 6769 from Dynamic Auto Works, we didn't see a number that matched up to the big number they had, but I just don't think we have enough data to really either agree with or dispute their claim. So I do have a few conclusions that I was able to draw about the 65 Omega. If you're trying to make big power on a stock location turbo, the 65 Omega and the Pure 900 are really where your choices are at. Maybe the 950 horsepower with the 65 Omega is possible, but I also feel like it's probably pretty knife edge performance, and it's going to be very dependent on the rest of your setup as whether or not you're going to be able to achieve that kind of power or not. Additionally, the 65 Omega is a good value. It provides you with a turbo, but also with that is a kit that comes with upgraded charge pipe, upgraded air intake, heat shield. It comes with quite a bit. If you haven't already invested in charge pipes and intakes and that kind of stuff, you may like the value provided to you by Remnant Performance with the 65 Omega. But I spend a lot of time thinking about that 600 wheel horsepower street car and the options for a build operating in that window. I think the 65 Omega would do well to accomplish that goal, but the new Pure 800 is more prevalent, more widely used, is more of a known commodity to operate well in that window. And I've found data that supports that in that particular operating window of over 600 horsepower, the new Pure 800 is a good option for me, and it may be a good option for you. Ultimately, you need to look at your build, decide where you're trying to go with your build. Are you trying to get into the 600s and then push on in the 700 and 800 horsepower range? Or is a 600 horsepower street car where you're wanting to operate? You have to decide for yourself. But I feel that with the research I've done, I've been able to show that really all these turbos that I've shown you are going to be able to achieve power anywhere between 500 and maybe up to 800 horsepower. There is a wide array from Pure, Dynamic AutoWorks, and the 65 Omega from Remnant Performance that can get you into this particular window, that 500 to 800 horsepower window of power. As always, I want to know what you think. Please comment what your experience has been with any of these stock location turbos. I kind of feel like that upper 800 horsepower range might be the limit to where these stock location turbos operate, and after that it might be time to go to a top mount turbo setup. Well, I hope I was able to help you with your turbo upgrade decision making. All the charts that I used in this video are actually on my Facebook page. Link to my Facebook page is in the video description. But if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to Grumpy Vet Garage, liking this video, sharing this video. We also have a Grumpy Vet Garage merch store. The link to that store is in the video description. By all means, go in there and get something for yourself. It really helps out the channel to grow. If you want to contact me, you can do that through the comment section of this video, but you can also reach out to me on my Facebook page or my Instagram page. Links to both of those are in the video description. But as always, thanks for coming and seeing me in my garage. Until next time, have a good one.